I'd like to start us off with an acknowledgement. On behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, we'd like to actively recognize that we are on Indigenous land, the traditional current territories of the Coast Salish people who have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities, and we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to identifying racist practices, to practice allyship, and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. We are happy to make all commission meetings open to the public. Please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings since the commission is an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders that in turn make the actual decisions. We encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. This meeting is a hybrid meeting with some individuals participating remotely while others are participating in person in the boards and commissions room in Seattle City Hall. I'm pulling up our Brave Space norms. In advance of today's meeting, well, I didn't do this. So I'd like to invite someone to choose one of our Color Brave Space norms that they feel might have particular relevance or that you want us to hold with us today. Is there anyone who would like to pick one?
I'm happy to. This is Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah. We're talking about data today. So I think the looking for learning and committing to learning in public is an interesting one to hold in our minds. Often I feel like when I look at data, I try to understand the story behind it or why or what it means. And I think that we should stay curious and maybe not bring our biases to data and to numbers, but rather really stay curious and look to learn about what might be factoring into the outcomes, knowing that much of displacement and migration of people of color and low-income people happens within white dominant power structures. So maybe our white dominant power structures aren't going to be the ones that give us the answers.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a great one for us to hold today. So on the agenda today, we have one agenda item, as Lauren referenced, a briefing from several department staff on using data to prioritize RSJI communities for place-based city investments. I'm going to move to approve our minutes next from our February 13th meeting. Can I ask for a motion to approve those minutes?
Rose motions.
I think I heard Rose first. Can I get a second?
Matt will second.
Matt seconds. Thank you. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. Just some reminders about our upcoming commission meetings. The next Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting is Thursday, April 3rd from 7:30 to 9. That will be held on MS Teams. And then our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, April 10th from 3 to 5:30 p.m. And that one will be a hybrid meeting with some folks participating remotely and others in the boards and commission room at Seattle City Hall. With that, I will pass to Vanessa for some commission business.
Thank you, Jamie. As Jamie noted, this is a hybrid meeting. All of our commissioners are actually participating remotely. Staff is here in the boards and commissions room at City Hall. And I'd like to remind commissioners that we will be using the MS Teams chat function to be recognized to speak, but not to provide any substantive comment. We do have 3 members of the public that are joining us. Just a reminder that we only use the chat to recognize for commissioners to be recognized to speak. I'll also let's do introductions, Jamie, and then I'll read information about our public comment, and we can see if our guests want to offer a public comment.
Sounds great. So we'll go ahead and do introductions. If you can do your name, your pronouns, what neighborhood you live in, and if you want to say anything about your job or where you work, you can do that as well. So I'm Jamie. I use she, her pronouns. I co-chair the commission with Michaela, and I live in the future 130th station area. There's a lot of construction and activity happening. It's exciting. And I work in climate change and environmental justice. And I will pass to my co-chair, Michaela.
Thanks, Jamie. Good morning, Michaela Daffern, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill, and I work in affordable housing policy and planning. I will pass it to Matt.
I'm Matt Hutchins. I use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle, and I am an architect. I will pass it to Caleb.
Good morning. My name is Caleb Tolde, he, him pronouns. I live in Beacon Hill, and I am an educator. I'll pass it to Rose.
Good morning. I'm Rose Lucello, Whitson, pronouns they, them. I live in the Laketon Springs / Northgate neighborhood, and I work as a wetland biologist and permitting specialist for Jacobs for my day job. I'll pass to Dylan G.
Dylan Glosecki. I use he, him pronouns. I live in the Central District and am an architect with Perkins Eastman, working on multifamily housing and urban infrastructure projects. So yeah, I'll pass it to Lauren. Have you gone?
I haven't, thanks. Hey, this is Lauren Squires, she, her. I live near the intersection of Rainier Avenue South and Martin Luther King Jr. Way by Franklin High School in Mount Baker. And I work at King County Metro. I lead the Connecting to Transit program, focusing on all the ways that people access our transit services. Zio, are you off the bus yet?
Well, can you hear me
great.
okay?
Yeah.
That sounds great. Awesome. This
Yeah.
has not worked in the past. Zio Alvarez, she, they pronouns. I live in White Center, Highland Park. I'm a designer at an architecture firm downtown. Staff?
I think Andy's the last commissioner.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Andy.
Hi, Andy. That's okay. No, it's hard to keep track. Andy Dannenberg, he, him, live in Northeast Seattle and teach at University of Washington in public health and urban planning. And I guess we go to staff.
Robin?
Robin McGonigal, I'm staff for the commission. I use she, they pronouns, and I live on Vashon. John?
Good morning, everybody. I'm John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns. I'm staff to the Planning Commission. Olivia?
Good morning, everyone. Olivia Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also staff to the Planning Commission. Vanessa?
I'll wrap us up. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns. I'm executive director of the Seattle Planning Commission. We will be introducing our presenters after public comment, so hold on to your seats. We are happy to provide options for public comment. There are several ways that can be done. If people can email me 8 hours before the meeting, and I'll read the comment. I have not received any comments from anyone. If offering comment during the Teams meeting, please raise your hand in MS Teams meeting to be recognized to speak during the public comment portion, which we're going to get to in about a minute. And if dialing in by phone to the meeting, please email me at Vanessa, VANESSA .Murdoch, MURD as in David, OCK at seattle.gov, and indicate your name and the phone number you're calling from so you can be recognized to speak. Jamie, I will turn it over to you to make the public comments.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. So just a reminder again that the commission provides time for public comments at our meetings. A reminder that we do not hold public hearings and we are an advisory body. We make recommendations to elected leaders who in turn make the actual decisions. Individuals who make comments to the commission should remember that the mayor and city council make the decisions. We encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately directly to elected officials. I invite individuals in the audience, if there are any, in the future or at the end of the meeting, to offer public comment, and please keep any comments to 2 minutes if we do have public comment. So.
Thank you, Jamie. Just checking one more time, we do have 2 members of the public joining us that I can see. And if you would like to offer public comment, please raise your hand and I'll give you a minute to do that, or 30 seconds. And of course, you don't need to, but we want to make sure you have the opportunity to do so if you want to. I'm not seeing any raised hands, and I'm just quickly checking my email. And I don't have any emails indicating a desire to offer public comment. So with that, our public comment is closed. I'll turn it back to Jamie to introduce our agenda item.
Sounds great. Thank you, Vanessa. So today we're getting a briefing about using data to prioritize RSJI communities and place-based city investments. We have Diana Cosineri, Philip Carnell from the Office of Planning and Community Development, and then Leslie Webster from the Seattle Public Utilities, Serena Lehman and Jonathan Lewis from the Seattle Department of Transportation. So we're incredibly lucky, 3 departments worth of folks today. Staff from these departments are joining to brief us on how they use data. And thank you everyone for coming. We're really appreciative. We have about an hour and 15 minutes for this agenda item, and please be sure to leave about 30 to 40 minutes for comments and questions. So I'll pass it over to Diana first to introduce herself and then her colleagues.
Great, thank you so much. We are absolutely thrilled to be back here talking with the Planning Commission. I am going to check one thing on the technology front, and I am wondering, Olivia, would you be able to share your screen with the presentation?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me just pull it up.
All right, awesome. And I'll
sorry, just double checking. The slides you shared yesterday are the most up-to-date ones, right? Because it's like a
yes,
slide.
indeed.
Okay, great.
I appreciate that. And then I can take over sharing screen after I do my bit too. So you don't have to do it for the whole presentation. Okay. So we are really thrilled to be here. We know that many of you in the Planning Commission already have some familiarity with our Racial and Social Equity Index, which we're going to be telling you a little bit more about in terms of sort of an overview and update, and then really getting into the meat or the tofu, if you are vegetarian, of the presentation, which will be really describing how departments, SDOT and SPU, are really operationalizing use of the RSE index to help prioritize equity in their place-based planning and their investments. Just a little bit about me, I am a strategic planner in OPCD's Long Range Planning Division, and I serve as the city demographer. And my colleague, Philip Carnell, who will introduce themselves in a minute, is going to be also joining me and doing sort of this overview and update. And then we have planning and portfolio managers in SDOT and SPU in this panel describing how the city is using the index in the work that their teams are doing. So I'm going to turn to my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. Then Philip and I will start the presentation and do a quick overview and refresher. Philip, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Philip Carnell, they, them. I'm Planning and Equity Data Analyst in the Office of Planning and Community Development under the Long Range Planning Division with great guidance from Diana. And I work on a broad range of projects like this on some of our other public data sets that we produce around displacement, as well as demographics and other kinds of monitoring work that we have throughout the city. And yeah, I'll pass it off, I guess, to SDOT, Jonathan.
Hey, morning. I'm the transportation planning manager at SDOT. Good to see you all again. To Serena Lehman.
Morning, everyone. It's nice to see everybody this morning. I'm Serena Lehman. I'm at SDOT with Jonathan, and I'm our portfolio and asset management manager. And in my kind of overall portfolio includes, overseeing of that like performance monitoring around the levy, as well as other key performance metrics. So with that, I'll hand it over to my SBU colleague.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie Webster. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the planning manager for drainage and wastewater at Seattle Public Utilities. And I think I'm passing it back to Diana, maybe?
Yes, indeed. All right, next slide, please. All right. And then we can go on to the next slide and then the next slide after that. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. So OPCD developed our Racial and Social Equity Index, which we're going to be referring to as the RSE Index, in 2017. That was in collaboration with a whole bunch of additional departments who were really wanting an in-common set of map data showing where our Racial and Social Justice Initiative, RSJI, priority populations make up large shares of neighborhood residents. And we developed the RSE Index as a tool that departments can use to inform the design, the prioritization, evaluation, etc., of programs, planning initiatives, and investments. OPCD maintains the index and refreshes it every 3 years. And the map that you're seeing here is our most recent update, which we released in 2023. And I've got to say that even though this index was originally kind of a grassroots offering, it has taken hold over the years and is employed by many departments across the city. It's also a featured tool in the city's new One Seattle data strategy, which is a coordinated strategy launched last year as part of the implementation of an executive order by the mayor. And the idea of that strategy is really to help inspire collaboration and systemization of the ways that we use data at the city and sort of share our learnings with each other in various departments about effective use of data. Okay, and next slide, please. So for some more brief reminders on the index, it's a composite of 3 equally weighted sub-indices, each of which includes data on a small number of population characteristics or conditions related to race and ethnicity, socioeconomic disadvantage, and health disadvantage and disability. And you see the components, the indicators that are part of each of these sub-indices here on this slide. We selected these individual components after we did, a whole bunch of study, but I gotta say, unfortunately, even if we were to switch some of these out and look at other indicators of disadvantage, the fact that we've had such a long history and it still remains in the effects on people, of segregation and disinvestment and so forth, this index would look probably a lot similar, even if we switch some of that out. Most, though not all of the indicators are from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey. The components are mapped at a tract level, and they're ranked and then divided into 5 quintiles or categories, from the lowest equity priority quintile that's shown in teal to the highest that's shown in maroon. And we often suggest that departments use the 2 highest equity priority quintiles as the RSE priority areas for focusing services and investments, but departments might choose to do that a little differently and just include the top quintile, or even go into the 3rd quintile as well. Depends on their needs. And one thing that I'll note is that the prioritization of the individual areas in terms of which areas are selected is a dynamic thing. And one thing that we anticipate seeing is that as areas continue to be gentrified, like in the Central District, there's going to be kind of an ironic thing happening where those areas start to get more into that yellow middle area. So one of the things that we encourage folks to do too is to really kind of consider the long history of displacement that's been occurring, as well as they think about their priorities and how to do place-based investments. Okay, and next slide, please.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is this the right one? Sorry, I went back and forth.
Oh, okay. That's cool. All right. So I'd like to quickly mention some additional considerations for using the index. It's best really used as a starting point to be considered along with community input, information from departments' own sort of infrastructure data sets and so forth. Also considering if there are other populations that aren't specifically prioritized in the RSE index that are relevant to the work at hand, like a program focusing on kids or older adults, would make it important to also bring in some analysis of where those populations live in the city. Also important to note, the index itself does not say anything about how many people live in an area. So, it's about characteristics and conditions. So we suggest that users look at population density alongside the index. Next slide, please. Some additional considerations. There can be a lot of variation within not just across census tracts. So, the areas that are right like along or close to the shoreline can be a lot more affluent than the blocks that are further inland in a census tract. Sources like the Census Bureau that we're using don't have comprehensive neighborhood level data for some RSJI priority populations. So for example, LGBTQ persons, people experiencing homelessness, and other marginalized populations have really incomplete data represented here, so need to be considered based on other information that is available from programs. And of course, RSJI the priority populations don't live only in RSE priority areas. So we suggest that, programs really, think both, okay, in terms of people individual or household individual kind of terms, as well as place-based terms. So in the next several slides, we'll be highlighting some ways to access the index. Philip will also be talking about some of the ways that we are sort of expanding the offerings and varieties of ways that we are showing the index. And then we'll get into the tofu or the meat of the presentation with our panelists from SDOT and SPU. So that concludes my slides. And Olivia, would you like me to take over and sharing the slides, or would you like to do that? Either way works for me.
I'm fine to continue sharing.
Great, thank you.
Great. So if we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a list of resources for accessing and using the index. We have this interactive mapping app that you can use to explore the index, which I've shown on the right here. This view shows the RSE index and some background information. We also have additional American Community Survey, demographic, and population data layers that may be of interest embedded in this app. If you can go to the next slide. These additional layers can be turned on and off. Each American Community Survey layer has a pop-up for selected census tracts, which you can see here on income and poverty, as does the RSE index, which is the one that has the different maroon colors for census tract 92. There's also a printer-friendly PDF of the RSE index map, and it goes pretty well as well if you're looking at posters. I don't know if y'all can see me on here, but I've printed them out right behind me as well. With this most recent update, which we completed in 2023, we've also provided a user's guide to get started with the RSE index. This guide includes details on the construction of the index, considerations for its use, and more than a dozen examples illustrating ways different departments are using the index. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing as OPCD, in particular Diana and myself, which is different activities to support the adoption of our technology, of our data tools throughout the city. This includes both internal kind of advertising, where we go and we actually do presentations to departments, as well as going to organizations and students outside the city, such as Diana and I have visited University of Washington's iSchool. We really act a lot in, as a starting point, and we talk to people about how they can get started using it. But then we also come in and we provide assistance as thought partners wherever anybody's at in the process and to what kind of level they're planning on using this. And thought partners, giving advice, giving guidance, but also just thinking through new tasks and new ways that we can use this. This has also meant, if we can go to the, we've also explored different ways that we can view the RSE index. We've tested a block group version of it. Right now, the version that we're looking at today is census tracts. And we've also looked at creating an extended version to index tracts outside of city limits against those that are in, for different departments, programs, and services that allow for participants who live outside of the city's political boundaries, or for departments that serve folks outside of the city's boundaries in their own projects or programs. If we can go to the next slide. Another major accomplishment for 2024 in supporting the index adoption was in presenting and creating a mini workshop for the city's Racial and Social Justice Initiative 20-year summit in front of well over 100 attendees from across city departments and a variety of rankings from people who are heads of departments all the way to folks who are, kind of entering at the first stages. OPCD presented an introduction to the RSE index for all levels of data users. 3 key partners who have used the RSE index in their own presentations acted as co-presenters, those being the Parks Department Community Fund, SDOT's Levy Equity Framework, and the Office of Innovation and Performance's Seattle Rescue Plan Evaluation Team. We held a mini workshop where tables across the room and groups of tables could take some time to ponder the potential uses of the RSE index for a theoretical topic. The goal of this workshop was to bring people with all levels of experience and perspectives on data, mapping, and planning for equitable investments together, so that they could workshop these topics and exercise the mindset, the ideas that one might need to apply when implementing the RSE index. To do this exercise, each table had a theoretical investment topic, new sidewalks, tree plantings, spray parks, that they could workshop how they would strategize using the RSE index to identify investing priority areas. We gave participants like the old school laminate overlays of current conditions in Seattle of the RSE index, things like looking at the child age population density, the county's heat index, and we asked them what their observations and what strategic direction they might take their team in recommending investment decisions. Furthermore, we provided these discussion questions that we've got on the side to understand how users consumed planning and mapping data to prioritize these investments, and to get individuals thinking about how we would evaluate and measure whether our investments were really successful in advancing equity across the city. Overall, this was a really rewarding session where we were able to introduce the RSE index to folks who may not themselves be data analysts, planning wonks like myself, planners, and we also were able to, give credit to departments who are already using this and provide use cases of how the RSE index is being implemented across the city. So next up, I am going to hand it off to the SDOT team to discuss the Transportation Equity Framework. So Jonathan and Serena, y'all are up.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to post a link to the Seattle Transportation Plan in the chat. All right, let's go to the next slide. Hey, everybody. So glad to be here and see you all. I'm sorry. In some ways, I'm sorry that I was with one of the committees, the Land Use and Transportation Committee, last Thursday. So this is probably too much too much of me. First off, when I co-managed the Seattle Transportation Plan with my colleague Joanna Valencia, and So I'll talk a little bit about that, and we are working on a new implementation planning process with Serena, the STP, Seattle Transportation Plan Implementation Plan. So I'll talk a little bit about both of those things. First off is the Transportation Equity Framework. I know you all have heard about this document. This is an important foundational document. It's a functional plan around one of our core values, and was an input to the Seattle Transportation Plan. So one of our core, again, foundational documents. And in that is a section on decision-making, transparency, and accountability. And this is really where the RSE index shows up. Serena will talk more about its role, the TF's role in the levy. But just from our perspective, this is where the high-level strategy around using data to guide decision making, and the RSE index is the main data tool we use to do that. Let's take a look at the next slide. So here are the departments, the STP, and now the department's external facing goals. You'll see 6 of them here. Equity obviously is one of them. And there's really 2 components to the equity goal. The first is around how we work, and how we show up in communities and work with communities. And then the second is around where we work. And that's, we use RSE index to guide both of those things. Of course, today you've asked about the where we work part of that. And so let's jump across to the next slide. The other component that's in the Seattle Transportation Plan that's very much related to this topic is our performance measures. These are all in the link I shared. This is Appendix C. We've compiled all of the performance measures. This is just a screen grab of the top, like a little snippet of the document, but just to give you a sense of how this is laid out. There are 2 tiers. Well, the department has 3 tiers of performance measures. The STP outlines the what we call tier 1 and 2. And these relate to, we can talk about this all day, but the top tier is like our key outcomes that we're after. So you see Vision Zero, greenhouse gas emissions, getting those to 0 by 2050 and so forth. So things that we don't have total control over, but are focused on as long-term outcomes. There are 8 of these for the department, and there are 34 tier 2 measures, and these are more specific to more topically specific outcome-based measures, like access to transit. For all of these, if possible, we track it by the RSE index. So we run a cross-tab on how we're doing over time against where there are inequities and how we're working to overcome those. So you see that what I've circled there in green is, do we track this measure according to the RSE index? So of the top tier measures, 6 out of the 8 were able to track by RSE. You can see the screenshot I grabbed includes one that we can't, and that's greenhouse gas emissions. We have that just as a total citywide number, right? And frankly, if there was a higher concentration of CO2 in one neighborhood, that wouldn't necessarily matter. So we've worked through all 42 of them to see where we can track it. Does it matter? And so we will be publishing a biannual report for all of these measures. The first one is due next year. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that of the 34 tier 2 measures, 20 are trackable by the RSE index. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So I'm sorry this is small. I hope you guys have access to these slides in the end, but this is a screen grab, a portrait screen grab on a landscape slide. But this is in the Seattle Transportation Plan document. And it lays out the 4 steps for how we prioritize projects. This is a key input into the levy prioritization process and will be part of our SDP implementation planning as we continue to stand that up. Equity shows up in several different ways in this prioritization process. This is obviously highly organized around our goals. So step 1, we draw candidate projects from a lot of different sources. In step 2, we do a quantitative assessment, and we have measures per each goal, and the RSE index is what we use for equity. So this goes into our scoring rubric, and gets points, etc. Later on, there are other qualitative, and you see equity showing up there as well. But the key way we use the RSE index is in this step 2. Let's move. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing here, which is some of our some of our layers in the STP. I should have put a slide together. This didn't occur to me until this presentation started. If you go into the STP in the technical document, some of the layers have equity already cooked in. So for example, one example is the pedestrian prioritization. We've already broken out our pedestrian missing sidewalks and substandard sidewalks by tiers, and this tiering has equity cooked in, and that's of course using the RC layer again. And then another way in the department is what we call the HIN, the High Injury Network. That's a combination of crash prevalence and equity, and again, RC layer. So there's a lot of different ways it's cooked into precursor inputs that inform prioritization schemes. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. And I will hand it off to Serena. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have used the RSE index in how we help support our programs for prioritizing projects, as well as how we then evaluate how we're doing in terms of delivering our work. So I'm going to just give some really quick background on levies. I also went to a subcommittee within the last month where I showed one or two of these slides. So I'm sorry if you're hearing it twice, but so the transportation levy, SDOT is funded by several different funding sources, and transportation levies is one of our most significant single source of funding. So last year we just completed our second transportation levy, the levy to move Seattle. And then starting this year, we are starting to implement our newest levy, the 2024 transportation levy. Levies fund predominantly doing work in the right of way, including like paving, sidewalks, and signals. There's other work that the department does that is not those things and is funded by, we have many other funding sources. So we have funding sources that include our Seattle Transit measure. We get funds out of the general fund, and those all also help support our work. What I'll be talking about today, though, is really focused on our transportation levy and how we prioritize and evaluate that work. Next slide. So back in 2020, we did a COVID impact. We call it the 2020 COVID-19 impact assessment. And in that, we did a racial equity analysis on our the levy to move Seattle, our previous levy. And one of the outcomes of that the racial equity analysis was that we really wanted to we wanted to know kind of how we are distributing our investments through the levy throughout the city of Seattle. And so our goal was to improve the equitable distribution of levy investments. And when we say improving the equitable distribution of levy investments, what we really mean is ensuring improvements are prioritized in areas of greatest need or historical disinvestment, not just an equal distribution citywide. And so we then saw that, so in that work, next slide. And so by kicking off that work, that also supported meeting some of our strategies that were identified in the transportation equity framework. I'm not going to walk through all of them here, but one that I wanted to highlight, one of the strategies that was highlighted in the transportation equity framework that Jonathan mentioned earlier, was to add equity related data layers into all of SDOT produced web maps and ensure that staff are trained trained and use this as part of their research decision making and project outline, et cetera. And we have a really when we think about equity related data layers, the RSC index is one that we have been consistently kind of recommending and implementing as that kind of base layer to reflect on when we're making decisions. Next slide. Great. So out of the 2020 levy equity work plan, one of the things we did to kind of really, one of the big questions is like, how do we know what's our baseline? How do we know what we're already doing in terms of implementing our work equitably through a geographic lens around the city? And so what we did is we took, starting in 2023, we looked at all the different locations and dollar amounts we're investing around the city, and then overlaid that on top of the race and social equity index. And so what you're seeing here is this map. This is something that we have not published externally, and we have predominantly used it as an internal tool to really, one, look at where we're doing our work, and we're able to look at it. We're able to analyze it through kind of a few different layers. One is that for everything we're doing with the levy for a year, where did we do that work, and how do you see that distributed? And you can see that analysis on the right. Based on the 5 different quintiles. But then we also kind of dove in a little bit deeper to look at how we were distributing those investments based on our different programs that are specifically called out in the levy. So it's really small probably on your screen, but we can look at where we are looking at Vision Zero, where we're looking at bike corridors, and you can then look at each different program and analyze how they are distributing their work. And we want to acknowledge, and Diana really mentioned this at the beginning, is that we use this as part of a whole toolkit in terms of how we analyze and reflect on our projects. Every program has different goals. Like Vision Zero is one of our really key programs, and Vision Zero is ending traffic related deaths and fatalities by the end of, I think, 2035 or 2030. I can't remember which, but so that's safety is going to be the primary goal that's guiding that program, but we still want to think about how then equity and the kind of how we're distributing that work across the city, how we then prioritize that together. And so taking this data, we can look at both location, what the item was that we were doing. So paving, a stop sign replacement, but we can also look at dollar investments around the city based on the RSC index. And then we've been working very closely with all the leads for these different programs that are listed on the right to ensure that as they're working on prioritizing their work for the upcoming year, the upcoming 3 years, that they're consistent, as appropriate, consistently around the department using the RSC index as one of those kind of key decision-making tools as we start prioritizing work. Again, and then we want to acknowledge that each program has different goals, and each program also has different geographic restraints. So like our bridge program, right? There's only so many bridges in the city, and there's limits in terms of how we can, change those investments based on their location. So what you're seeing right now is reflective of our previous levy. And so what we're working on right now is we are looking at how we can then, with the SCP implementation plan, the RSC index, and kind of the new goals set forth by the new levy is kind of thinking about how we can set goals for ourselves to continue moving towards, distributing our investments equitably. When we were developing this upcoming levy, during the proposal, the mayor stated in the kind of our initial write-up was that we aim to distribute our levy investments equitably with reference to Seattle's Race and Social Equity Index, our Transportation Equity Framework, and the Seattle Transportation Plan. And so we're using that as kind of our guiding directive in terms of how we are then setting our programs up to deliver over this next 8-year levy. And so I think that's all I want to cover right now, and I'm happy to dive into more questions. We have some other things that we're working on that go beyond the levy in terms of how we incorporate the Race and Social Equity Index in terms of evaluating our overall department performance, but we'll share more on that in the next 6 months. So I think now I hand it over to Leslie.
Great. Thanks. And I will try to go through my slides quickly so we save plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So as a reminder, I'm Leslie Webster. I'm the Drainage and Wastewater Planning Manager at SPU. And we can go on to the next slide. I appreciate you guys having me here today. I think SPU spends less time at the Planning Commission than SDOT probably does. So I just wanted to quickly introduce you to SPU. A lot of what we do at SPU is underground and kind of behind the scenes, but the people who live and work in Seattle depend on our critical drinking water, solid waste, and drainage and wastewater services every day. Next slide. So I work in our drainage and wastewater line of business, and we provide a diverse array of core services, such as protecting Seattle's waters from pollution and responding to flooding, like big rain events like we had last night. We build and operate and maintain Seattle's stormwater and wastewater infrastructure to promote public health and protect the environment. Next slide. I'm here today to talk with you about the long-range planning that we do for drainage and wastewater, and of course how we use the RSE index in that work. As we all know, in the future, Seattle may be facing major environmental, social, and economic challenges due to climate change, seismic risk, population growth, and affordability. And Shape Our Water is SPU's 50-year plan for our drainage and wastewater systems and our opportunity to plan those systems to be resilient and prepared and adaptable for these future challenges. If you were on the Land Use and Transportation Committee, you may have seen me give a presentation on this planning effort back in October. So some of the overview content will be a little familiar, but I'm focusing today, of course, on the RSE index. So it should introduce you to a new aspect of this planning effort. Next slide. Shape Our Water is a multi-year planning process, and it's broken up into these 4 stages. The analysis stage is where we identified and prioritized our existing and future risks citywide, and this is going to be the majority of what I cover with you today. The visioning stage was where we set our vision, goals, and the equity framework for the next 50 years of our drainage and wastewater investments, and we did this in collaboration with our communities. Right now, this year and last year, we're deep in the planning stage, is where we are identifying and sequencing those near-term and long-term investments and what we're going to do in our, how we're going to improve our drainage and wastewater systems. And then the final stage is implementation, which technically begins after the plan is complete, but given that this has been a multi-year planning effort, we're also taking some of the near-term recommendations from Shape Our Water and using them to pilot integrated projects and also area plans in Seattle's neighborhoods. Next slide. So drilling down into the analysis stage, again, this is all about identifying and prioritizing a wide range of drainage and wastewater risks, both today and in the future. We looked at things like flooding, sewer overflows, sea level rise, water quality, aquatic health, seismic risk. Like drainage and wastewater issues are diverse, and there's a lot of them. So next slide. In terms of equity in the analysis work that we did, we were really guided. SPU, we're lucky to have an environmental justice and service equity team. We worked with them to do a racial equity toolkit early in this process and really intentionally thought through how to incorporate equity into this stage of our planning. In the past, what we knew at SPU about where our systems have problems is largely based on reports from our customers. However, we suspect that this complaint-based understanding really has a bias towards certain type of customers. So those with the time and resources to call in the problem, they kind of understand what they should expect from government. They trust government. They're not worried that, their housing status might be, up in the air if they were to report a problem. Maybe they're worried that their landlord is not going to like that they called the city about it. There's lots of different reasons why people may not be calling in when they're having a flooding issue. And so to correct for this, we used models and focused outreach to expand what we know about where our system issues are. And also because the kind of issues that we have, sewer backups, flooding, they don't affect all our customers equally. We also incorporated racial and social equity into our prioritization process. So all this is to give voice to historically underrepresented or underinvested communities, and ultimately to distribute SPU's investments more equitably. On a side note, the RSE index you're seeing on this slide is an older version than what Diana and Philip presented earlier today. A lot of this analysis work started back in 2018 and was done through 2022. And so we did use older versions in some of the prioritizations that we do, but we do keep up to date with the changes as they come out from OPCD, and we use them when we update our analysis work or perform new analysis in the future. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly walk you through an example of how we use this equity approach in one of the projects we completed for the analysis stage. The challenge I'm going to show you, kind of walk you through, is flooding. So specifically flooding caused by the capacity of our drainage system. So with our analysis, we aim to answer these two questions. Where do we have flooding in our drainage system? And of those locations, where should we prioritize for projects? Next slide. So prior to Shape Our Water, we relied on an inventory of flooding that had been built over the years based on complaint and claims data. So we supplemented this information using what we call H&H models, or hydraulic and hydrologic models. These kind of models can be used to simulate how our system performs under different rainfall scenarios. And so through these modeling scenarios, we found places in the system where flooding may be occurring, but that we didn't already know about. So on the slide here, you're seeing a network of drainage assets that are in a model, and then you're seeing kind of highlighted the areas that may be flooding during a storm that is predicted to occur every 25 years. Next slide. Once we had all these modeling results, we wanted to reach out to people who live in the areas that were identified that we didn't already know about, to determine if they indeed were experiencing this flooding. And so here we used the RSE index to prioritize neighborhoods for outreach. We also funded community partners like Horn of Africa Services and Chinese Information Service Center to perform that outreach in those neighborhoods. Because they had existing trusting relationships, and we thought that they would have a better chance of getting good input from community than we would. So next slide. This slide shows some results of how the composition of our inventory changed because of the modeling and outreach that we did. So you can see many of the sites in the inventory still come from reported incidents. However, a lot of those were further corroborated with modeling or outreach, and of course, additional sites were also identified. Next. This is kind of there's a lot on this slide, so I apologize for that. But the last step in that equity and analysis approach is how we incorporate equity into our prioritization process. So SPU prioritizes our system issues like flooding in this example based on risk. And so in infrastructure planning, a lot of times, we assess risk based on the relative consequence of an event happening and also the likelihood or frequency of that event happening. So for using our example of flooding here, there's a bunch of different factors that roll up on that consequence side of the risk score. So we assess things like how many properties would the flooding affect, and what part of those properties would it affect? Are we talking about a structure? Is it just the driveway? Are there critical facilities on those properties? Is the flooding going to affect our transportation network? So if so, is it affecting arterials, et cetera? So you're seeing all of that kind of in, if flooding happened, how big of a consequence is it? And then on the frequency side of the score, it's a little more straightforward. It's just like, how frequent are we expecting this flooding to happen? And we get that information from our modeling. So we tried two different approaches to how to incorporate the RSE index into this process. The first thing we did was just try to include it as one of the many factors on that consequence side of the score. However, when we tested that approach, we found, because there's so many different factors kind of lumped together there, that the equity score really wasn't having an impact on the overall prioritization. And so the second thing we tried, which is what we landed on and what you're seeing on this slide, was separating it out and adding it to the overall score as a separate factor. And you're seeing here the equity score in green on a scale of 1 to 5 is based on the location of the potential flooding risk relative to the RSE index. And it's those same 5 categories that Diana walked you through at the beginning of the presentation. All right, next slide. We're almost there to questions. I know you've been very patient. So same approach, different challenges. I just walked you through how we use that RSE index for flooding specifically. This slide shows you the nature of the other types of analysis that we performed and that we also use the RSE index in very similar ways. So we use the exact same process to identify and prioritize locations at risk of sewer overflows. So kind of where our sewer system doesn't have enough capacity. We took our list of known locations for sewer overflows, added modeling results, focused outreach based on the neighborhoods that were prioritized using the RSE index, and then prioritized that new list with the RSE index as a standalone scoring factor. For creek flooding, extreme storm flooding, and sea level rise flooding, again, we use models to identify areas susceptible to inundation, and then we prioritize those areas using the RSE index. And for wastewater drainage condition and seismic risk, we use different kind of models, but the same idea, and developed a list of at-risk assets and then prioritized them again using the RSE index. So you can see, I kind of walked you through in detail one type of issue, but we did this for a number of different issues, and the RSE index was kind of embedded and integrated into all of them. Next slide. So this is just a where you can learn more about the things I've shared today. So I wanted to share these resources with you. First, the maps from the analysis projects I talked about today are included in our Power of Water story map. So that's a good place to start. And if you want to dive even deeper, we have a reports page on the SPU webpage where you can download all the technical memos of the analysis work in case you're really interested in that. Next slide is just a quick screenshot. One of the elements of our Power of Water story map was to kind of break down and show the RSE index because it has been so integrated into the work that we do. So we have a whole chapter about water and equity in our story map, and this sort of lets people go through the map and the data from OPCD. And next slide is just to show you the second screenshot here is that flooding analysis that I walked you through. So the results, people can kind of zoom in and zoom out and look at where flooding risk might be higher in their communities. All right, next slide. That's kind of the meat or tofu, like Diana said, I like that, of the presentation today, but I did just want to quickly give you a snapshot of the 2 other stages of this project. So the visioning stage is where we really worked with our communities to develop the vision and goals and equity framework for the work that we do in drainage and wastewater, as well as what will shape our water plan itself. And so this here you're seeing the goals that we developed with our community and the community vision document, which is you can easily access it on shapeourwater.org if you're interested in that. And then the last slide is what's next. So this is a glimpse at what we're up to now. We're sort of in the midst of this planning stage. Last year, we brainstormed solutions to all of these challenges. We identified and prioritized them in a series of workshops. We did workshops with our own staff, with key partners in other city departments and other agencies, and also with community. And now we're in the process of refining those solutions, organizing them into alternatives, evaluating them against the goals that were developed for the community vision. And the last step will be documenting our preferred alternative in a Shape Our Water plan. So thanks for your time today, and thanks OPCD for inviting me, Diana and Philip for inviting me to share this work with you all. And with that, I'll pass it back to Diana or Olivia.
So here's a list of all of us in the panel and how to get a hold of us. And now we'll turn it back over to the Planning Commission to field questions or to ask us questions or to make comments.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. It's just such a privilege to have you here and have 3 different departments presenting to us at the same time. It's wonderful. And I know that not all of us are part of some of the committees you already presented to. So I know even though it might have been repetitive for some, it's incredibly valuable to have you at the full commission meeting. I'm going to give folks a chance to drop your questions in the chat. I am asking you to split your name, to say your name and then say what section or topic it is for. So if it's a question for all or for OPCD or for SDOT or for SPU, just to kind of like, I'm going to try to group them together. So we might not go exactly in the order. We'll start off with Lauren for the question for all, and then any other questions for all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This was incredibly comprehensive and really makes me proud to live in Seattle. Dana, when you're sharing that, the basis of the RSE index is the American Community Survey, which is maintained by the federal government. And the practitioners across departments at the city of Seattle are using this data in such a powerful way to operationalize our racial equity goals. Just makes me honored to be a city of Seattle resident and to be a practitioner here with this being the norm. So thank you to you and Philip, Dana, for the ways that you partner across the city of Seattle and departments to expand our capacity as a city to really use data to direct investments where they're most meaningful. So just kudos to all of you for the ways that you're committed to eliminating racial inequities through investments. I do have some specific questions, but one of the things that really comes to mind when I think about kind of the high level here is the RSE index, as you said at the top, Diana, is where there are larger shares of neighborhood residents that meet a certain amount of race, socioeconomic, or health characteristics. So this is where people live. And it's South Seattle and it's North Seattle and it's the U District and the Central District. And as someone who lives in Southeast Seattle, I feel the compounding impacts of all of these investments, which is a great problem to have. But I also wonder if there's ways to look at equity characteristics, for example, with transportation, of how people move. What are their pathways? How are our priority populations traveling as opposed to just where they live? And how can we target benefits towards travel patterns and characteristics? So that's a little bit off topic, kind of over to Jonathan and Serena, of how are we using travel characteristic data to inform our investments to make sure we're giving people affordable options, we are reducing the time that they spend on transit, for example, and kind of looking at those pathways and not just where people live. And then kind of the second part of the question is kind of to Leslie and the SDOT team of how you're overlaying potential investments in the right of way on streets to make one investment and to have one impact, as opposed to kind of multiple that are really, the investment kind of is a weight, it's a privilege, but it also has real impacts on our communities that we're trying to bring up to the level of investment that they haven't seen historically. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if anyone, Serena or Jonathan or anyone wanted to respond to that.
I'll respond in one very particular area. So in terms of thinking beyond like where people live and how people are traveling, I can speak for that's something that as we think about our next steps about how we're supporting the department and prioritizing our work, is thinking about then looking at travel patterns, looking at how we are investing at communities that people are traveling through, what people's origins and destinations are. So I think I guess I wanted to say yes, that's a great idea, and we cannot wait to get working on that when we can move to our next phase of our work. So thank you.
I might move to doing OPCD questions next, because I think I have a sense that might be some of the foundational data background questions. So I want to make sure that we do that, and then we'll go back to some questions for all. So let's see, I had first up on that, I had Michaela and then Zio.
I will cede the floor, and I'll save my question for all.
Okay. Theo?
Yeah, I echo what other people have said. This is really incredible work that all of you are doing. I had a question that, Philip, actually a comment you had made me think about, which is you mentioned that the equity index reflects like a point in time acknowledgement of how neighborhood characteristics exist in that moment, and that map has changed over time as neighborhoods have changed in the city over time. And I'm really interested in how OPCD is kind of tracking that change over time, and if there's like a distribution of that data also to the departments that you're working with. It seems like you've done a lot of really incredible, extensive work getting these sort of data products out into the hands of folks in the city, and that's just a really interesting piece of that. Yeah, Diana or Philip, if you have thoughts.
So I can quickly jump in and say that we have additional tools, mapping apps and so forth that look at change over time. Mainly looking at how the concentrations of folks by race and ethnicity have changed. And this is a really good reminder to sort of feature the additional resources, the additional context that we have alongside the RSE index. We have a user's guide. And I don't think we make that point in the user's guide. So I am adding a note for the next time we update the user's guide to talk about the integration of those sort of components. Philip, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so I think that to your point of like it's a point in time. So as we've discussed, we update it kind of on a 3-year schedule, and in addition to that 3-year schedule update, there is a lag with things like American Community Survey data or CDC public health data that gets incorporated into it. So we try to use the most recent and up to date. To the second standpoint as well, that you were asking about, we do look at like what differences and how things have shifted when there is a decennial census and there's like a geography change where we get a bunch of new census tracts. It's important to both look at like what changes might have happened because there was a census tract split, as well as what things might have changed just because a shift in population characteristics or in health characteristics. What we strive to do is to make the older versions also accessible to our partner departments. That way, if there's a business case and a business need to like look back and compare to, say, the RSE index that they used whenever they were planning for a project, they are able to go back and be able to do that. And that's something that we continue to support as we move forward with these updates.
Thanks. I'm just mindful of time. We've got 11 minutes left, so I'm going to go to Dylan next.
Thank you guys. Just echoing kind of what we've heard so far. It's it's the kind of stuff that makes you excited to live in Seattle. It's really inspiring to see how the data is being collected and then utilized and implemented across agencies. And so thank you guys for sharing that with us. And the work that we're seeing is really it seems to be using the data exactly how it was intended to be used. But I guess my question is so this data is curated by OPCD, as I understand it. You guys are doing the collection and then providing kind of the mapping outputs. And then not only do you guys use that data to develop policy, but agencies, across the city and various other, departments inside the city use it as well. And my curiosity is, what role do you see, as you guys are the creators of this data, and then you send it out to the world and it gets used. If there is, for instance, policy that is potentially contentious, and give an example of some policy that was developed during the One Seattle plan or the draft plan, proposed reducing housing capacity on basically on disadvantaged parts of the city as a way to try to mitigate gentrification. And there's a lot of concern that was going to have a backfire effect, and it was going to actually just hamper these sites' abilities to gain value for their land. And when there is policy that is contentious, that you feel like is actually going to potentially harm the areas that you guys had identified for investment, that is going to potentially further disadvantage some of these areas, how do you guys work with that? How do you guys, do you guys feel that, is there a role there that you guys take on as kind of purveyors of this info to try to make sure it's utilized in the best way possible, and that there's not misguided attempts to use it and in ways that could harm, certain areas of the city? And I'm not saying there's any nefarious, moves here. I don't think that, but there has been policy that's utilized this with, potential negative impacts. And how do you guys work with that? How do you guys curate, I guess, this info to really ensure it's used for the benefit of these areas and doesn't further harm them?
So I guess I'm actually wondering a little bit, more about, do you see harm that could be done by looking at the patterns in the RSC index and then applying those? I'm a little confused by your question.
No. I think that the information you guys are identifying is really important. It's just that if there is policy that is proposed, it can have a negative impact on some of these areas. Do you guys weigh in and say, oh, we're glad you guys are using this, but we think this is misguided? Or, do you guys provide the data and you let the other departments utilize it? What is your role in really kind of curating it and making sure that it's used for the benefit of these areas? Do you guys speak up if you feel like it's being misused, basically, is how I like to ask the question? And is there a role that you guys take on in kind of ensuring it's used for the best way possible?
I think our roles are dual in some ways. I mean, our main role as the data folks in OPCD's long range planning division is to be really thoughtful about curating the data and providing guidance in its use and disseminating it. I know that, Philip is also involved in really looking at some of the detailed zoning things that are being proposed. And Philip, you're more involved in those trenches than I am. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that. So, what you're asking is do we try and be responsible stewards of the data and help guide folks on a technical scale, down a path that will, really be beneficial in terms of equity? And part of the way that we do that is by really discussing that this is a starting point and not an end point of the conversation around equity, and that we kind of continue to provide guidance that folks ought to look into other issues, and there might be other issues that aren't considered. And that's part of the reason why we have those two big slides in every presentation that we do on what the considerations are for using the RSC index. But anytime that there is a data-informed policy, there's going to be pros and cons. There's going to end up being like different views on what positives and negative outcomes might look like. I know in the example that you were discussing just now, that was actually using the displacement risk index, which is a slightly different tool that OPCD does produce. But I think that's a great example of, there's different views on how this investment strategy might produce different equity outcomes and what the impacts on that are. And we really ask departments to look into those things and have those questions for themselves, and to not just stop by, just using this map for what it is. Ask those deeper questions.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. I want to try to make sure we can get to the last two folks, so hopefully we can keep things succinct if we can. I had some really quick questions, and I'm just gonna like fire them off real quick. One is Diana. When you'd presented to us previously a while back, I think I had asked if the index is evenly weighted, and I know that there was some consideration at some point to consider weighting, and I'm just wondering if you landed at saying to keep it evenly weighted. And then I know there was some comment about potentially expanding or to kind of beyond the city boundaries, and I'm curious if you all are collaborating with King County's mapping efforts there, because I know they're doing their own RSJ mapping. And I think that would actually be a really powerful collaboration. And then your consideration about block group data, I'm wondering if you're encountering any data privacy concerns there when you're going down to that small of a geographic area. I know that I used to work a lot with King County Public Health, and that was a big concern when we got down to that level, was protecting folks' privacy and anonymity in the data. So those are all the like data-y questions for Diana and Philip. And then I had one question that was for SDOT around I'm kind of disappointed to not see anything about air quality or diesel emissions in the metrics. Because I think I was kind of surprised to see that greenhouse gas emissions are not part of the RSC metrics considerations. And I understand like OSC is probably measuring that at the citywide level, but I wish there was another metric there that was tracking disproportionate pollution burden around air quality, particularly from traffic and from, so just something to think about. I know the plan is done, but like I would love that to be something considered in the future.
Oh boy. Okay, let's see. On the evenly weighted thing, yes, we kept it evenly weighted. It makes it simpler to understand and therefore use. Block group data, the Census Bureau has really strict rules about avoiding any kind of disclosure. And in fact, they take data out of what they publish for privacy protection. So that's not a concern so much with these data. Let's see what other technical stuff that we can go over real quick.
So yes, and the county items, I will say part of it is that this is a largely city servicing tool, serving different departments as well as our residents. And the extended version of that is to assist city departments and residents to understand how they might compare to different parts of the city as well. So while we haven't approached King County on that front, we are looking at it kind of like to continue to be consistent with the areas and indexed against the areas that are wholly within the city of Seattle. That is hopefully a very quick explanation for a very complicated data point in time, but no, we have not approached King County at this point in time on that specific topic. Thank you. Jonathan?
And we've just tended to focus, I mean, we don't have jurisdiction over diesel emissions. That's a primary reason why we haven't focused on that. I think it's interesting to think about rolling it into the index, but we are tending to focus on CO2 emissions because that's where we can help move the needle. It's interesting to see this dashboard. I've never seen this before, so we'll dig into this, and we may want to circle back with OPCD on the more pollutant level emissions beyond CO2. Thanks.
And just so that folks are aware, I linked to the Office of Sustainability Environment's One Seattle Climate portal in the chat that does have emissions from road transportation overlaid with the RSC index.
Okay. Oh, we've got some questions here for follow-up. Michaela, if you want to add your questions to the chat at all, we'll make sure that these get to everyone. I know this is such a tofu-y topic. So I just appreciate you all taking the time this morning to meet with us, to present everything. I echo the sentiments that I know Michaela and Dylan just put, and Lauren all put out of just being really proud to be at a city that prioritizes this and works on it, and all of you for the work of trying to integrate that into how our city operates and does its work. So just expressing a lot of gratitude and appreciation for all of you, and also for getting up early in the morning to be with us.
Thank you so much. It's such a meaningful part of our work to, talk with the planning commissioners, have you give us really thought-provoking questions, and to understand how our colleagues are using the index and how we can continue to help folks use it and other tools more effectively.
Yeah, thank you all for serving as commissioners.
And we will work on getting answers to folks through the Planning Commission staff as well.
Thank you all so much. All right, we are adjourned. And Vanessa, you're capturing all these questions, right?
Yes,
Okay,
trying.
great.
Thanks, everyone.